lifelong Minnesotan. That's right, you betcha. And whether I like it or not, I'm a fan of all of our sports teams here. Gophers, Vikings, Twins, T-Wolves, Minnesota Wild. So that's what we're going to talk about here in the meat of the show. Minnesota sports teams and what's going on with them. All right, first let's discuss the big trade that the T-Wolves made before the deadline last Thursday, or on the deadline last Thursday, I should say. And that was to bring home the big ticket, Mr. Kevin Garnett. Now, the Timberwolves acquired Kevin Garnett for forward Thaddeus Young. That's who they gave up to get him. And Kevin Garnett has a $12.5 million contract that expires at the end of this season. So that will free up a lot of money for the T-Wolves to play around with in the off-season. And it is also expected that KG will call it a career at the end of this season and not come back for another year with the T-Wolves, although that it is possible, depending on how he feels, both physically, emotionally, and mentally. If he were to want to play, I'm sure the T-Wolves would happily sign him to a one-year deal next year. But that is not what is expected to play out. It is expected that when this season is over, Kevin Garnett will retire, and he will be able to do it as a member of the Minnesota Timberwolves, the team where it all started for him. Now, me personally, I have been a huge Kevin Garnett fan since he came to the T-Wolves. I actually met him after he was drafted by the Timberwolves before the season started. It was the one time I got to meet the man, and he was a wonderful human being then, even back at that young age of 18, 19. I think he was 19, but I don't know for sure. But that leads me into why KG is a significant topic right now, because I've had people come up and talk to me since we traded for him here last week and say, well, he's not that good anymore. It's not going to make a big difference. And to an extent, they're right. And no one should expect him to go out there and be 2010 big ticket. That is not who he is anymore. But make no mistake, that is not what we acquired him for whatsoever. We acquired him for the expiring contract so we could have that money to spend on making the team better next season, first and foremost. We also acquired him to infuse some life and some interest in the fan base of the T-Wolves here at the end of the season. Because if you've been watching the T-Wolves, they're not competitive yet, and they're not winning a ton of games. But this Kevin Love for Andrew Wiggins trade that they made seems to be what could possibly finally be a move to put the T-Wolves back into relevancy in the NBA again, because that's what people need to understand about Minnesotans, especially Minnesota basketball fans, and Kevin Garnett. Kevin Garnett, unless you were old enough to enjoy the Minneapolis Lakers and George Mikan when the Lakers were actually from Minnesota, unless you're old enough to remember that and have experienced that, Kevin Garnett is professional basketball in the state of Minnesota. The Minnesota Timberwolves as a team and as an organization were completely irrelevant up until the arrival of Kevin Garnett and the emergence of Kevin Garnett as a superstar. Kevin Garnett single-handedly made professional basketball relevant and popular in the state of Minnesota. Single-handedly. It hadn't been done since George Mikan in, I believe, the 40s and 50s, somewhere in there. Somebody look that up for me and let me know. But so the point is that KG is our basketball god. He was our basketball equivalent of Kirby Puckett. The franchise guy. And when Kevin went away, we went back to irrelevancy. Like it or not, that's exactly what happened. So Kevin coming back to both the Minnesota fan base and to the national and international fan bases and media bases, it gives our organization a little bit of extra spice, a little bit of extra intrigue, and relevance that we have not had since his departure back in 2007. Now, are we going to win more games this year because KG's on the team? No, probably not. But can he teach a lot of our young talent some work ethics things and some on-court and off-court things as a professional, as a consummate professional that KG has always been? Absolutely. He is there to speed up and enhance the maturing process of all the other younger players on the team that we're looking to build around, such as Wiggins and Rubio and the others and the rest. But I believe that is what's going to happen, and he's already talked in his press conference about the bigger picture, and that's one of the main reasons he wanted to come back and finish here as well, not just because it's where it all started, but because he was such a part of this community and a part of this franchise, and he made buco bucks. I mean, this guy made tons and tons and tons of money. He's the big ticket. But he has expressed his interest to be a part of a league front office, to own a team even possibly. And what better place to do that than here in Minnesota with the Timberwolves, where he is beloved by almost all sports fans in this state. He could very easily comprise a group of himself and maybe Jimmy Jam and a couple other local business successes and make an offer to eventually one day own this team. And I think that would be an incredibly wonderful thing for both Mr. Garnett, the NBA, and the Minnesota Timberwolves franchise. So, to sum it all up, big ticket back is big for the big picture. We might not see it right now. We might not see it by the end of this season. But big ticket equals big picture for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And it is nice to be able to be excited to be a Timberwolves fan once again. Although Andrew Wiggins has done quite a bit of that on his own this season here before KG came back. But it feels good to at least feel like I'm not an idiot for caring about the Timberwolves. All right, so next in the meat, we got to talk about the Minnesota Vikings, and of course that means talking about Adrian Peterson, because for the last several years, let's face it, they've been kind of one and the same thing. Now, last week around this time, Vikings GM Spielman came out and said that he expected Adrian Peterson to be on the field for the Vikings next season, so long as he's able to get reinstated by the NFL. Peterson, a day or two later, came out and said that he was, quote, still uneasy, end quote, about returning to the Vikings organization regarding some issues he feels as far as how much they supported him in compared to how much they worked with Roger Goodell and the league to shelf him, which is what he feels, that people within the organization were a little too compliant and eager to work with Roger Goodell to get him on the exempt list, as opposed to standing up for him and fighting for his right to get reinstated and play football. Well, anyway, that was just talk until this weekend at the NFL Combine, where it got real interesting, apparently. Adrian Peterson's agent was at the Combine this last weekend, the NFL Combine, where they scout all the draft prospects, poke and prod them, measure them, label them, grade them, stamp them, all that good stuff. Pick them apart, you name it. And while AP's agent was at the Combine, he sought out to speak with several of the Vikings representatives who were there. Well, apparently, AP's agent and the vice president of football operations for the Vikings engaged in a very heated argument with each other, at one point needing to be separated by onlookers and people surrounding the situation. And after this heated altercation, Adrian Peterson's agent said that Adrian will, quote, never, end quote, play for the Vikings ever again. Now, this is definitely not the news you want to hear if you're a Vikings fan who has moved past what Adrian Peterson did that landed him on the exempt list and out for the season and still out yet at this point. And if you're the Vikings organization who had numerous opportunities to just cut this guy and start moving forward and repairing their image without him, but they chose to keep him around and keep him on under contract, and now he's questioning their loyalty and support to him and throwing what appears to be a very huge diva-like child tantrum, almost. It's just, it looks very immature and unprofessional, and it really sways me personally more to the side of, as a Vikings fan, that we just need to get rid of this guy, that he's turned into a troublesome head case whose baggage outweighs what he can contribute to the team on the field. And I hate to say that because I've always really liked the guy personally and professionally. He's a beast on the football field. He makes your team so much better by being in the backfield. But eventually you got to look at him like you look at every player in this league, like the Percy Harvins of the league, like the Brandon Marshalls of the league, like the Des Bryants of the league. I mean, the list goes on and on. I can't name everybody. But have we finally hit the point where this guy's baggage outweighs his potential? And based off of his agent's actions at the Combine this weekend, it pains me to say that I feel the answer to that question now is yes. And I feel that the Vikings should look to trade him and get whatever they can and move forward without him. However, I am hoping that this was just an overreaction on the agent's part, and that he was not accurately representing his client Adrian Peterson in these moments, and that when Adrian Peterson himself and the Vikings organization get together, that hopefully this can be resolved and Adrian Peterson will be playing for the Minnesota Vikings next year. However, if I were forced to put money on it, I would definitely bet on Adrian Peterson not being a member of the Minnesota Vikings next year, unfortunately. In other Vikings news, the Vikings have the 11th pick in the upcoming draft, and as I mentioned earlier, the NFL Combine was this last weekend, where they get to look at and evaluate most of the potential candidates and prospects in the upcoming draft. Really the last step in the process, and all that's left for scouting players will be their pro days, and then if any are desired, personal meetings between the players and the organization, coaching staffs, what have you, on their own. But the Vikings have a few needs, to say the least. The Vikings have some needs, and hopefully we address those needs with our first and second round pick. You should definitely be able to get a solid plug-in right away first season starter with the 11th pick, and there is some debate though as far as to what position I think they should use that pick for. Now, it is my opinion that 11th pick should be used to acquire an offensive lineman. Preferably, if there is one in this draft, I don't know, I haven't looked at him close enough yet, but I will. But if there is a Zach Martin type lineman in this year's draft, that is the guy I feel the Minnesota Vikings would benefit most by targeting and drafting with that first round 11th overall pick, if there is such a guy. Now, Zach Martin, if you don't know who I'm talking about, he was the rookie offensive lineman that the Dallas Cowboys drafted last year in the first round, and this guy can literally play every position on the offensive line at a Pro Bowl level. Everybody assumed he was going to be played at tackle because it seems like the only offensive lineman you can draft in the first round is a tackle, which I don't know why that's the rule, but it seems to be for the most part. But they took this Zach Martin kid, and they played him at guard, which is his more natural position, and I want to say he was a Pro Bowler. If he wasn't, he sure as heck should have been. But he was a huge, huge reason why DeMarco Murray won the rushing title this season, why that team and that offensive line was head and shoulders better than they've been in over a decade. A big, athletic, intelligent, versatile offensive lineman.